Peter is the founder, president, and CEO of International Corporate Management Incorporated, an international investor relations and strategic planning firm. As a philanthropist, Peter is focused on helping adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse through a 501c3 nonprofit he founded called Let Go, Let Peace Come In Foundation. Early in his own recovery process, he realized there was a lack of support and resources for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. The solution to this need was to establish an organization that could provide them with the same healing opportunities that he had experienced. The foundation focuses on advocacy, awareness, and subsidizing treatment sessions for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and facilitates such cooperation with an established relationship with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Peter's self-published memoir, Betrayal and the Beast, the true story of one man's journey through childhood sexual abuse, sexual addiction, and recovery, has been critically acclaimed as both impressive and candid. Peter and his wife reside in Monterey County, Pennsylvania. They have 2 children. Please welcome Peter.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you for being here today. It's invigorating to see so many men and women working to help so many unfortunate people that, as Mrs. Marquez said yesterday, had experienced trauma in their life. I want to first thank Sam and Wanda for inviting me to speak. I believe Wanda saw me on an interview in ABC when we were helping the Sandusky boys from the tragedy in Penn State. And Sam called me the next day and said, would you please come and speak at our conference? And I think, as Mrs. Marquez says, it's very difficult to say no to Sam. So, actually I was scheduled to speak last year this time, but my mom passed away 2 days before, peacefully. So today I believe she's in God's kingdom with Melanie, and together they'll put down on this presentation. So I'm going to bring a message today. I'm going to tell my story, but I want to talk about hope, salvation, redemption for the millions of men and women like myself that have gone through this life-altering event. And I also want to talk about a plan. Childhood sexual abuse has been going on since the beginning of time. It's definitely a pandemic position today, and I put this 503C together based on a couple of facts, 1 or 2 you'll hear today. But I do believe that we could do something about this, but it's very difficult to ask a child. So let me begin to tell my story, which basically is not a unique story. Children are very, very wonderful. I was born in 1952, and in 1959, my folks actually moved to this beautiful, wonderful neighborhood in the Philadelphia area, which was considered a great neighborhood. I was 4 months old. At the age of 7, it was full of children. I write about it in the book that I've written. Maybe ages from newborn to 23, 24, possibly as many as 30 to 40 children on the block. So one spring day, I'm out playing wall ball. It's a great game. All you needed was a rubber ball and the wall. And one of the teenagers that I really, really looked up to, he came over and he started to play this game with me. And boy, I started to say to myself, he must see something really special. I must be something that he sees, or he sees something in me. For him to take the time with a 7-year-old, gotta be something special. So after we play a couple times, he would take me to his house and say, why don't we go and get a drink? I said, okay. I mean, he lived 3 doors from me. My parents knew his parents. Never thought anything other than going to get a drink, and he was quite good. I mean, we did this 4 or 5 times. And I guess what I didn't realize at that point, he was grooming me. And by the 6th or the 7th time, he took an action that basically changed my life. That went on for 3 months, and I just didn't know how to stop it. I thought it was wrong, but I was only 7, so I wasn't really sure. He was telling me, this is what all the big guys do, and if I could trust you, you could be one of the big guys. So I said, well, I guess that makes sense, because every little child in the neighborhoods, they're emulating the teenagers, and they want to be like the teenagers. So it goes on, and then another teenager, who was the son of my mother's best friend, who was a bit stronger, more imposing, one day comes over, which was not unheard of in those times, just knocked on the screen door, came into the house. My mother at this time had 4 children. My older brother was across the street, and Jimmy walks in, and she said, well, I'm going to go across the street to pick up Lenny. He says, well, where's Pete? She said, well, he's in the basement playing with his toys. So she said, well, you go down and you watch him for me, and I'll be back. Well, I didn't think there was anything worse than when Johnny grew me, but Jimmy, I write in the book, Johnny, he took my childhood, but Jimmy, he took my heart and my soul. So there's always bullies. The bullies are around all the time. He continued to do that to me, but my parents did find out. They found out in 1959, and I knew something was wrong because they came to the bedroom at 10 o'clock at night, and they woke me up, and they said, it started out real quietly, we want to talk to you about John. And I said, well, what's up? So we think he's touching you in certain places. So I immediately looked at my dad, who was an imposing man, 6'3", very, very good man. But, you know, in the 1950s, corporal punishment was the rule, and I'm thinking I did something wrong here. So when she asked the question, I looked at him, and I saw almost for the first time ever in my little life there, a blank stare. So I said, well, I don't think he's going to hit me if I say the truth. So I said yes, he has been touching me. And of course my mother broke down and cried, and my father, you know, sort of huddled over us. And it was a telling time for sure. But when the speaker before us spoke about children telling, I'm waiting for them to ask about Jimmy. They don't ask, I don't tell, because that's what children do, we don't tell. So I never said anything about Jimmy. I lived with his perpetrations for 48 years. But my mom decided, and my dad decided, you better take him to a pediatrician. So he took me to the pediatrician, and of course everything was foreign to me. He asked me to lay down on my stomach, which was kind of crazy because he usually did his observations when we laid on the back, make sure our legs were growing straight, our feet, no knock knees. He comes out and he tells Mom, Dad, listen, he's not anatomically damaged, but he knew nothing of my psyche. I was completely, at that point, at 7, unbeknownst to my mother, my father, and to myself, my life was basically over. It basically had ended. So we go on, and I lived the next 48 years. 48 years, I actually become quite successful. And that's not another unusual aspect of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. As soon as I was around 17 or 18, I realized if I could make money, I could control who comes in my life and who comes out of my life. So that was a very, very big motivator. And you hear the stories of Oprah Winfrey. We have Sugar Ray Leonard, 6-time world champion. He's on the board of directors of the foundation, very highly successful. Sexually molested at 14 by an Olympic coach. So many of us are driven to succeed because we really have no self-worth. We really believe we're pretty damaged. It would take a life-altering event. I'm going to click to this next slide. So I put this slide up when I speak because when I entered recovery at the age of 55, I was told by a psychologist in New York that I had the emotional stability of a 7-year-old. I just found that incredibly wrong. I'm doing these complex financial transactions across the world at an office in Europe, and this man's telling me I have the emotional stability of a 7-year-old. So he said, you take some time here, you give me 4 months, and at the end of that 4 months, not only was he correct, it was pretty frightening, that I didn't develop emotionally. See, when we get touched like that, when a child gets touched like that, we just emotionally shut down. Now, I grew to be 6 foot tall, 195 pounds. I grew to succeed. People around my circle, in my circle, felt I was very successful. But I was emotionally down. I could not come up. And I write in the book, all through the book, my first experience with a girlfriend, she wanted to connect sex and love. And I said, they don't go together. Because when we're a child and we're introduced to the sexual predation, we kind of feel like it's got to be in an isolated, not good situation, because our brain takes it in that way. That's the way our brain takes it in. And the brain, as we all know, is a very complex organ. 85% of our brain is formed from 0 to 12. If we experience any sort of trauma, as the speaker before me was saying, we're going to carry that for a lifetime, unless we get the proper help that we need. So, this was a big, big learning experience for me, because I was very, very self-motivated, and I was going to succeed. And no one makes a better actor than a child that is sexually abused. We are going to make sure that no one knows that we're damaged. And I think this is part of the problem we have as a society. So children, we take on this guilt, this shame, no, this can't be happening to anyone else but me. And that part of what we're going to talk about today, that's really true, because we have a hard time talking about this issue. We had a hard time 35 years ago talking about breast cancer, okay? The problem here is, for this 7-year-old, there were no pills, there were no radiation. It's our brain. We need to have our brain rewired. I remember when Dr. Brewer interviewed me on HLN, I was on with a pretty significant, successful psychologist, and he said, I'll get into it later, but we helped some of those boys in Penn State. He said, well, what actually are you doing for them? And I said, well, we have a qualified trauma therapists that are working to rewire their brain. And all I heard from California was, cut the psychologist, I want to come back to Pete. So he's talking to my left ear, he said, Pete, I've been saying this for 25 years, that the brain is so shut down from being so traumatized that it actually has to be rewired. Because there's stems there when we're touched that just completely come apart because we can't process it. We don't understand what's going on. Many adult survivors have reported that, hey, I didn't know it was supposed to feel good. I didn't know that this was going to happen. And then all of a sudden we get in our teens, 14, 15, we're starting to really take this in and say, hey, that wasn't what the big guys do. That was really, really, really distorted. And then we completely shut down and say, I'm not telling anybody that this happened to me. Anybody that this happened to me. And I don't think it's much different for man or woman. This knows no race, no creed, no social economics. Former Miss America, Marilyn Vanderburg, who wrote about my book, actually endorsed it. She was highly successful. Her father started molesting her at 7. Multi-millionaire. They had buildings named after him. And stopped only the year before she won the crown, in 1958. She didn't come forward when you were talking about the statue. She didn't come forward until she was 42. Because, there's so much that we're carrying with this, we can't come forward with it. So she came forward at 42, they took all the buildings down in the name of her father, and she's probably one of the, I think, fierce advocates in the country today. So that's what happens to a child. We completely shut down, and it affects the entire family. Because they're my parents, they're trying to work this out. I read about it in the book, they didn't really know what to do. So God love them, the best thing that they thought to do was to move. Let's move. We'll get away from it, which was only a geographical change. My brain was going with me for the next 48 years. But God love them that they tried. So so that's the story. But let's talk about how we can do something. I'm speaking to you now as a 7-year-old child that went through some pretty difficult times. And you know, I say 3 months. Everyone should understand, if a child is touched one time, just one time, at the foundation I started, there's a young lady that they post pictures of their childhood and how they were feeling during the time of abuse. She was 14. She was touched one time. And she said, I went about life. She got her MBA. She succeeded at life. She had a daughter. When the daughter turned 14, she completely fell apart. Alcohol, drugs. I mean, she's in recovery now. We've helped her. So it's just that one time. The brain, as I said, very complex. So it stored it, but she didn't really address it until that happened. So where my journey of healing has led me. So it's 2007. I have a beautiful estate home in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia. I have 2 wonderful sons. My lovely wife, who is with me today. I'm traveling the world, and the manifestations from the abuse have been ticking away like microchips in my head for 48 years. And I know that I'm compulsive, but I say, well, but I'm successful. There's not a day I get up in the morning and don't think about Jimmy and John and what they did to me, but I'm never connecting it. I'm never connecting it to my compulsive behavior. I just don't connect it. So my son, who I love dearly, as all parents do, catches an email of my latest insanity. And another statistic that's important to understand is that 77 to 78% of boys and girls that are sexually abused have a sexual compulsive disorder. Because as we're trying to work this out, we get so nervous, we don't know what to do with it. So then as we grow into adulthood, that nervousness comes, and the only way we know how to get out of it is to sexually act out. So my son caught this email, and he's a hell of a basketball player too. He went to Lehigh University, made the basketball team as a walk-on. But I used to take him to all these gyms where the good players were. So this email comes through on April 24th, 2007 from a woman who's talking about disconnection. There's something wrong with you. You're like trying to save everybody, but you're so living 2 lives. And my son saw it. I wasn't sure he saw it. I read about it as well. But 3 days later, I said, what's wrong, Luke? He said, Dad, you're my hero. You're my idol. What's going on with you and Mom? And at that moment, as disconnected as I was, I really deduced in 4 or 5 seconds, it's his life or my life. I could tell when he was 18, I knew he had a special friend. Listen, Mom wouldn't understand this. Let's just put it aside. But then I realized, well, you're going to put him in the box that Jimmy put you in. You know, this is what all big boys do. So you're going to say to him, hey, Mom wouldn't understand this is what all men do. All men don't do that. Healthy men don't do that. So I said, when Mom comes home tomorrow, we're going to talk about it. And I could just see his shoulders, 1,000 pounds of weight come off his shoulders. So that was the beginning of my life in 2007. That was a time when my lovely wife came home. I sat down and told her, this is what's been going on. And of course, what I'm going to propose to you today is not just helping the men and women that go through this, and not just helping future generations of children. We're talking about saving millions of families. I got lucky. We went through a tough patch, a few years of tough patch, I'll talk about. But I got lucky that she was warm enough and kind enough, you know, to look at this whole thing and say, you know, he does this, he doesn't do this, but you know, she wanted the one thing I was never going to give her until I got the help that I needed. She wanted my defenses. And the first time I let my defenses down, my life was over. Strangely, 4 months to the day that I entered recovery, I found out from the psychologist, the only 2 people I really trusted in my life were my 2 sons, Paul and Luke. Not that I didn't trust Jane, I just couldn't give Jane what she wanted. But they would love me. They would let me love them back. But they wouldn't ask my defenses. So I told Luke what had happened, and It caused, obviously, a major disruption in the family. And I went to a doctor. And I said, look, this is what's going on. And he said, you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and you've been suffering for almost 5 decades. And that started my journey. That started my journey to start to read and understand what happened to me and what's going on with millions of men and women that experience this. I started going to a meeting with men and women over in Hatfield, New Jersey, and it was a collective group. It was about 12 or 13 of us that would meet every Saturday morning at 9:30. Of course, it was the only room that I really felt safe in because these men and women understood, because we all went through it. And we had a newcomer, a judge, mandated that this woman attend these sessions. And she walked in and she said, well, I was going to come here this morning, or I bought a gun last night, I was going to kill myself. And well, I said, well, that really shook me. There's got to be another answer. She was molested from the age of 9 to 14 by her mother's brother. And she kept telling the mother, and the mother said, imagine it. And here she sat at 34, completely broken. So I came out of that meeting, and I said to 3 people that really picked me up and helped me out, you know, when I started to realize, and this is a big impact, when I started to realize how much life I had lost. I was 55, and the work ahead of me was very, very difficult, extremely difficult. So I said, well, you know, how much more could I live? You know, I wanted to quit. I was in it 6 months. I lost my family. I lost my home. I lost whatever standing, which was ridiculous, in my circle that there was, because everybody dispersed. The men that hung with me, the men that came out and traveled with me, everybody ran away. Now, what's Pete saying about this sexual abuse thing? And, you know, we traveled here, we did this. How could that be? So this is 2007, and nobody had a clue. During this time, and this woman's story, I come out and I say to these 3 people, why don't we start a website, you know, where she could go and talk about the problem, you know, that she's having. There's got to be a better solution than she wants to hurt herself. And all those 3 people, which I read about them, all they had to say was, Pete, that's off the wall. You know, we're never going to be able to do anything like that. But they did. One was a psychologist. One was a deputy chief in the fire department of Philadelphia, which there were only 12. And one was a corporate executive at one of the big farms. All 4 of us had experienced child sexual abuse. So we got together, and I slowly stitched it together and put a board of directors together, which today includes Ms. Martha McGeary Snyder, who was honored at the White House by George Bush in 2008 for her philanthropy work. Michael Gillum, the psychologist who treated the young men from Penn State. Sugar Ray Leonard, 6-time world champion. Larry Miller, president of his own company, who is the son of a parent that was sexually abused, heard our mission and jumped on. What happens then, and I was just setting it up as a place for communication, I called it Let Go, Let Peace Come In, because the hardest thing we have to do as an adult survivor is to let go of the shame, the guilt, the addictions, and 97% of us actually develop some sort of nervous tick or mostly their addictions. They manifest different. Some are alcohol, some are drugs, some are sex, some are food. It's usually a pretty big disconnection to the reality of life. So that's why I call it Let Go, Let Peace Come In, thinking that it would be just a forum where men and women like this woman that was talking that Saturday morning. And what happens is something that I never expected. Soon, 10 states, 20 states, 30 states, then the entire country is coming in. They're visiting. Thousands of cities. I had this corporate buddy of mine in Switzerland. He said, look, Pete, I can set this up. We could have this in 60 languages. I said, I don't know. Milan, I don't know if we need it in 60 languages. He said, look, I'm telling you, it will work. So today, 51 different languages it's been read. It's been read in 6 continents. The only continent that hasn't visited is the Antarctica, and I'm sure most of you know there's no permanent inhabitants in the Antarctica. There's 250 part-time inhabitants. 164 countries worldwide. There's only 260 on Earth. And everyone knows Mark Zuckerberg's trying to connect the other 5-6 billion people. My guess is if he's successful in doing that, we'll also see another 100 countries, the remaining 96 countries to come forward and take a look at this. But the most significant statistic, 73% of our visitors are new. That's meaning people from around the world are they're Googling, I was abused, I'm an adult survivor of child sexual abuse. So 73% of the visits are all new. So where does that take us today? Now, I know we saw some statistics earlier, and when they say, when I say this number is really what's going on, and I think this number is low. And I in the book, I document where I got the numbers from, because we're not talking about this. Every adult in this room, it's statistically impossible that you do not know an adult survivor. You just don't know them because they're not telling you. This is how pervasive this is. So, if we do the math, there's 317 million people in our country. That means there's 60 million men and women like myself. 60 million who then marry or partner and have 1.2 children. I say to you today, there is no affliction in our country greater than this one. And statistically, we're not talking about it. And I think what I'm doing with the board and what I want to do and how I want to approach it, I think it makes sense, and I hope that you'll agree. So these statistics are alarming. And when I do speaking engagements and I do fundraisers, I can see parents out, looking at these numbers and, just horrific numbers and saying, very scared, not my child, can't be, I'm watching it. And, you could be watching your child all you want. If a predator has that child marked, that child's going to be sexually abused. But when I say this, and this is a true statistic, our children and our grandchildren have a very good statistical chance to marry someone like myself or a woman like myself. And that marriage is doomed for problems because we're just not, we just won't talk about this. So if we could talk about it, and I'm going to show you a plan that I think will help us talk about it, just think of how many marriages that are coming that could be prevented from exploding because these men and women aren't getting the help that we need. We desperately need this help. We desperately need it. So here's the premise of what I'm saying as the plan. Many people still to this day, they don't understand why does the child not tell? And we don't tell for a multitude of reasons. But I think the bigger question is, how can we expect a 9-year-old to tell when a 40-year-old will tell? So what I'm proposing is that we do this from the top down, not from the bottom up. We have tens of millions of men and women that need help, that are going out, going into careers, getting married, having children, and they're not emotionally healthy. Now, we all know that children model the systems that we come from. They model adults. So if we're doing it, now I'll probably be long gone. I'm hoping that I can get this to get a stake in the ground. 20, 30 years from now, somebody's going to come before you, but I hope to get a stake in the ground. Because if the children see us get the help, see us talk about it, see us go into meetings, which I'll talk about next, see us say, it's okay, we were children, we were just a child when this happened. Now our behavior is deplorable for most of us because we're either acting out or drugging or drinking, but that's a manifestation of what happened as a child. So what I'm saying is, this is what we want to do to help. So another phenomenon happens when I set up the website. All of a sudden, people start sending money. And I said, well, what am I going to do with this money? And because I found the operations of the foundation myself. So I said, I'm going to start a survivor fund, because when I first went into therapy, I had a doctor, a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, which is important, say to me, you are the top 1% of disassociated men or women that I've ever treated. The abuse that happened to you at 7 almost separated your brain in 2. So, since there's no clinical records of how long, I just took my experience. It took me about 25, 30 hours to say to myself, concentrate. I write about it twice a week, going into therapy, having this man tell me, the reason why you're doing this is because of what these kids did to you. So, when the money started coming in, and all the visits started to come, I said, we'll set up a survivor fund. So we give the money away. So we give it to moms and dads and corporate lawyers, anybody that needs it, to go get the help that they need. Some people, even some of the successful people don't want to see a check going to a psychologist, because then they got to say to their wife, well, I'm going there because I was sexually abused. So it's still that big secret. So that's what we do with the money. And we have enough feedback. We are getting enough feedback from men and women around the country that state, without that time, I don't know what I'd be doing today. So we know it's working. And what we do is someone called from Chicago last week, we find 3 trauma therapists. And this is key. We don't need a psychiatrist. We need a trauma therapist. We've been in a war. The only difference between us and the men and women, the honorable men and women that go to war for us and defend our liberties, is that you can't see our scars. But we're so psychologically scorned that we need that kind of help for our brain. And these trauma therapists that we have identified around the country, we pick 3. They're usually within a 10-mile radius of a man or woman. And whether they want a man to do it or a woman to do it, they interview the therapist. So they know what they're getting into. So I mentioned all around the country, Jerry Sandusky tragedy hits, and it's 2011. I had the foundation was running about 3 years. All of a sudden, we start getting calls from the lawyers and saying, listen, we have 8 young men, we can't find help for them anywhere, because everybody knows the story. They came to the second mile, they go to fathers, there's no money, no nothing. Could you help them? And they were bringing down Penn State football. And, I still believe to this day, Joe Paterno understood that boy in the shower was being crushed. He would have handled it differently, but he knew something was going on, but he didn't fully understand it. So we did help him. We helped Aaron, the boy who wrote the case. We helped Brett, the boy who took on so much guilt because he was 10 years older than Aaron, and said, boy, if I was spoke up. I spoke to Brett, I said, Brett, you were 11. Why would you speak up? Aaron didn't speak up. Yeah, but Aaron was only 6 when I was 11. So, I do want to say, though, out of the 8 boys, 4 young men would not take the help. They were embarrassed. 1 young man, after he testified, came out of the case with a paper bag over his head because he felt so much shame, he didn't want anybody to see his face. And meanwhile, he's the victim. And there's a case going on right now. In California with, I'm sure I don't know if everybody's heard of it, but 3 or 4 directors, very, very powerful men, extremely powerful. The young man, Mike Egan, who's come forward, and they brought litigation. Mike's 31 today. He spoke at a fundraiser we had back in December. Never had any help, never got any kind of therapy. We got him a great therapist in Nevada, California, and he's doing wonderful. So I'm going to ask Brandon to play what Aaron said, because I think this is what Wanda saw, and this is what caused Wanda to call me.
Jerry Sandusky, who was waking up behind bars after being convicted of 45 counts of abusing young boys. And this morning, his legal team is gearing up for a possible appeal. ABC's Jim Avila is in Washington with the very latest on that story. Good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning, Elizabeth. After its resounding loss and the lifting of the gag order, the Sandusky team can't seem to stop talking about an appeal. But for the victims, that's all just noise.
The 45 guilty verdicts made it clear the jury believed the 8 young men who testified against Jerry Sandusky. But until the jury spoke, the biggest worry for the victims and their families was that the former Penn State coach could walk.
That was my biggest fear. That because of who he was, that he would not be found guilty.
The mother of one of those victims, called victim number 1 by prosecutors, spoke exclusively with ABC News.
Even after therapy, he doesn't feel comfortable saying what happened to him to me.
Victim 1 recently finished high school. He was on the way to work when his mother called with the verdict.
He had to pull over his car. We talked about it for a few minutes, and he was extremely happy.
She says her son is working on his anger and disgust, now in counseling involved with a foundation called Let Go, Let Peace Come In.
I would like to help by talking to high school students about this kind of thing.
When we're touched like that as a child, part of our brain just shuts down, and we need mental health help and care.
Peter Palullo runs the foundation, which now counsels 2 of Sandusky's victims. A victim of sex abuse himself as a child, he says this trial has helped people realize the pandemic numbers. 1 out of 3 girls, 1 out of 4 boys.
We don't die, but we develop such nervous tics and addictions that we overburden the healthcare system.
Meanwhile, victim 1's mom says he is relieved the trial is now over, and while he's been damaged, he will move on.
He's a strong one, he's a survivor, and he'll get through it.
Will they sue? All the victims are saying now is they're keeping their options open, but it's likely Sandusky, Second Mile, and Penn State itself will soon see their names on new court documents. Elizabeth?
No doubt about it. All right, Jim, thanks.
So, Aaron, great young man, extremely great. This was done by ABC, and it was aired in 61 countries because it was worldwide. We received so many visits that it crashed the site. We couldn't hold them all. And money came in from as far as Brazil. So this is not a Catholic Church problem only, it's not a Penn State problem only, it's not a problem in the United States only, this is a worldwide pandemic. And those 61 countries read it in 30 different languages. So what are we going to do? All right, how are we going to do this? I've been, as I was introduced, a corporate CEO from starting my first business when I was 22. Went into the music industry, got a little lucky. Some group named the Rolling Stones came in and put me on the map. And then Stevie Wonder, and then Patti LaBelle, sort of got my career going. And then I would go on internationally to raise capital for the companies I would start. And I think to some degree God, didn't wake me up till I was 55 because he knew I couldn't handle it before then, and he knew that I needed some experience in raising capital. So we can be passionate for many causes, but without the capital that we need to do this, it'll never happen. So I put together, this is just to inform you what I intend to do, and God willing, it will happen. I put together a $25 million capital campaign to change the world on this issue. Interestingly, I started it when the Sandusky case came. Checks were pouring in. I couldn't, 20,000, 10,000, 50,000. We sent them $250,000 to start the study. Because what happened with Johns Hopkins, which I'll speak about in a minute, happened very quickly. One gentleman I called, I was in the middle of a tech company that I had co-founded with someone in California, and I saw this gentleman, I'll just call him Jim, in Texas, who was a very wealthy guy. And I called my friend Bill, and they said, Bill, it's your friend, do you mind if I call Jim and tell him what we're doing with Penn State? And, I'd never met the man, so I was doing one first on the phone. Started telling him what was going on, and I said, this could affect our children and grandchildren. When I said that, he said, hold, stop there. He said, boy, I wish you would have called me a year and a half ago. My daughter went to an Ivy League school, and she met this wonderful fellow in Texas from our hometown. And they just had this wonderful romance and love there. They got married, our families were united. All of a sudden, 2 years into the marriage, she started drinking, going to strip clubs, looking at pornography, and we just said, well, he's an alcoholic, we got that problem. So both families imploded. She was heartbroken. He goes to AA. He says something in an AA meeting, and one of the people in the AA meeting said, you talk about that baseball coach in Wesleyan from 9 to 15. This is your problem. So this is what Jim's telling me. The next day there was a $20,000 check on my desk, and he said, try to save another family, not go to the pain that we went. So it's out there. These situations are not unique. They are not unique. So here's the model. We're going to set up thousands of circles from California to New York. If we walk outside this fine university, we can walk for maybe a mile and a half, and we'll find an AA meeting. You can count them. There's 114,000 rooms for AA, but there are no rooms where men and women can get together and talk this through. As a survivor, the two things that helped me the most was to be in a room with another man and woman that had gone through this, and to get the qualified trauma therapy that I needed to connect all those loose brain snaps. So it's a little like the AA model, but it's a little different. We're going to have a qualified trauma therapist run these meetings. So it'll be safe, it'll be something where someone's saying, where are you going? We're going to a let go meeting, and they won't be embarrassed, and we can start to bring the stigma down. There is so much stigma with this, it's unbelievable. Statistics tell us, I look out there could be as many as 125, 130 men and women. Statistics tell us that 32, 37 have gone through this. So these rooms, once properly set up, we will work with Johns Hopkins and put together questionnaires for these men and women. Because again, remember, we want to do it from the top down, not from the bottom up. We want to show the children that we know how bad this problem is, and we're getting the help that we need. So we'll fill out these questionnaires, just their first name, what happened to them as a child, what they're doing to get better, how is the room helping them, and we're going to take those 1,000 rooms and 1,000 men and women, and we're going to create data. Because that was the comment that brought me to Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. I was traveling on a trip to London. I was on a Carmag, heading over to Berlin, and there's a doctor sitting beside me, and I write about it in the book. At this point, I never made eye contact with anybody because I never wanted to get into a conversation. But I was getting healthier, and he told me he was a doctor. In fact, he was an MD and a PhD, and he had stopped practicing. And he said, "Well, what do you do?" And I told him about the foundation. I could see his interest worked out. He was sitting on the tarmac and brings up his iPad. So let me see what you're doing. And he takes a look at it and says, I had a 36-year-old woman came to me in 1999, just before I stopped practicing. And I did a workup on her. At the end of the workup, she says, I think something's wrong with me. My uncle sexually abused me. She had 3 children. He said, I only got 2 hours of sexual abuse in high school. So I told her to go to a psychiatrist. But what you're doing here is pretty valiant effort. But if you really want to change the world, the power to change the world is the data. My guess is the men and women in this country are using the healthcare system in the billions. And if you take this to corporate America and you get them to understand, which is a feat in itself, you could really get the money that he needs. That Dean Flagg at Johns Hopkins, he's a friend of mine. He takes out his stories. So why don't you give Dean Flagg a call? Maybe he can give you some more statistics. I go over to Berlin, I call Dean Flagg, who's in Australia, calls me back the next day. He says, it's funny that you called. He said, we're just starting research that we think that this is so bad that it's now a public health issue, much like diphtheria and all the other problems that we face as a nation. Would you like to get involved with us? But before you answer me, let me see what you're doing. This is the dean, obviously Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health is a very prestigious institution. So we had the two doctors, Dr. Turner and another one, to take a look at what we were doing. And frightening, and very frightening, is that we actually had more statistics than they had, because of the men and women coming forward. So we got together, we put together a $3 million initiative. That initiative will be funded out of this $25 million. We've already started research in Denmark. What makes a man like Jerry Sandusky think that he lost these children when he's just completely destroying them? So we're going to be studying it from 4 different areas, and we're going to there's $1 million for prevention, which I'm all for, and any efforts for prevention I'm all for. I just see the thing that prevention lies at the feet of 60 million men and women like myself. By us speaking up, we will show the children that it's okay to speak up. So, I mean, what I intend to do, the gentleman that introduced me in the beginning as corporate executive, I've raised money my entire career. I remember I was sitting at one of the biggest banks in our country, like 28,000 employees, and I was talking to the foundation. I said, well, you have 28,000 men and women here. You'd be helping almost 7,000 of your own men and women. And she looked at me. She said, can't be that number. It's just ridiculous. And that's part of the education that we need to do here. We really do need to educate them. So I intend to go to these sources, Fortune 500 companies, wherever I need to go. I intend to go. 1.2 million nonprofits in our country. We're a generous nation. In 2011, we gave away $298 billion to our favorite causes and our favorite charities. None address therapeutic subsidies or support groups for adult survivors of child and sexual abuse. None. So, being a little bit of a statistical person I am, I'm thinking it's only going to take me maybe to meet 1 or 2 of those philanthropists that will make this their cause. And I truly believe that these first 1,000 rooms will break down the stigma and really address this issue where we need to address it so the children will address it. So we're not just helping these 60 million men, we're helping their spouses, we're helping their children. I got a call from a doctor in Washington, and he said to me, I just finished reading your book, and I'd love to meet your wife. And of course, I'm because I've gotten calls. I've got calls from all over the country about this book, and he could tell that by my silence I was taken back. And he said, well, let me explain. He said, you see, I am your wife in the book, and my wife is you. Now that told me volumes, because his wife had her MBA. He was a very successful doctor in Washington. He said, I read this book and I crammed it like a college course. He said, I've got notes and I really want to meet your wife, and I have to ask her a question. I said, well, this is about, I guess almost a year and a half ago. I was in recovery. I just celebrated my 7th year, May 1st. So I go home and I said, Jane, I got this call, Jane, and this doctor, he wants to meet him. He wants to ask you a question. He didn't tell me what the question was, but I said, but if, we had just reunited, and I said, I'll do it, I'll do it, you don't have to do it. So she said, no. Jane's a wonderful, wonderful woman. My good fortune that God gave her to me. She said, no, I'll go with you. So we go out to dinner, and this is where I'm going to talk to you about the extension. 3 sons, 19, 17, and 15. So he wakes up and finds out that his wife, who's a lovely woman, extremely attractive, is having affairs with, I think, 7 or 8 men. And he's completely flabbergasted. So he comes from Washington, we have dinner, and I could see he's nervous. She was crying a little bit. And he says to Jane, Jane, in the book, where you say, I was at my first service, and Jane came to the session, this man in 6 weeks described me to a woman that lived with me for 26 years. He doesn't like to be in crowds. He doesn't like to be touched. he can't be out of control. And each one of those, Jane says, yes, that's Pete. Yes, that's Pete. But, so then Jane says, yeah, but after that, he made decisions. He made decisions. And this doctor, I could see in the book, he like highlighted that. Because what I did was I chronologically tracked my recovery. And he knew it was 4 years later. So his question to Jane was, do you think that Pete made these decisions, or now with the type of work and where he is in his recovery at the end of the book, that they were actually decisions that were made when he was sexually violated? So I knew right there that this marriage was in the hinge of this answer. It was swinging. And she said, no, he wasn't a decision. I believe it was from the biological problems that he had when he was so violently sexually abused. That marriage is intact. But that 17-year-old son, when they came to the dinner, he said, why is Dad so angry? What's going on? So now that boy's going to go out with a girl, never was touched, but he's going to be so disconnected because he had this perfect dad that took fishing everywhere. The 19-year-old was in college. And then they went back, they talked to the son, and I've got some wonderful emails where they are in this journey. So that was my wife. She saved that marriage. So this is what we're going to do. We definitely need to replace the stigma that surrounds it. We're never going to get out of this. I mean, it's a situation that when we hear the word sex and then child, it's like taboo. We say glue. I think the viewership of CNN was off the charts during the Sandusky case. Off the charts. So we were glued to the TV because it was salacious. It was horrific. It was like, how could I gotta do this? So if we don't bring that down and bring it to the reality, if we can feel sorry for a child that's 8, 9, or 10, and that little girl or that little boy is getting sexually abused, our heart goes out to them. Why can't we understand that that child, now at 45, is acting out on that? I mean, we can't do that because we're afraid the stigma about it, and we also don't have the knowledge about it, that we carry that. So this is essential, as I say. So one of the things I want to do in the support room, I'm sure some people in here are familiar with AA. I remember when I wrote a trip and pushing the passages under the doors. A friend of Dr. Bob was going to be a meeting on the ship, and Jane wasn't quite sure who Dr. Bob was, but there were a lot of people showing up. So in that model that I talked about, when the people come into the rooms, I want it to be friendly. I want it to be not like it's a stigma that they're in the room. So I talked to Sugar Ray, and I talked to Annie, who's a psychologist, and we're going to start out some leaflets so when you come in, it's a welcoming, and people can start, there's a little bit of bio of Sugar Ray and Annie, myself, and say, hey, I'm not the only one, you know, maybe this room is where I belong. And from those rooms, we'll start to get people into private, therapeutic, trauma care. Once we do this, once we make it into the social consciousness, like I said, I don't know if I'll be around, but I want to start this. So when a parent and children are sitting at the dinner table and there's a conversation going on, the mother or the father can say to the child, not just about good touch, not just about, you know, who should touch you, because I got to tell you, you know, when we didn't talk a lot about that in 1959, it was more like don't let a stranger touch you. But it took so much for me to come forward. If they don't ask, and if they say to me, this is not a good touch, I would have said, oh, she doesn't mean Jimmy and John. They tell me they love me. They tell me I'm you know, big standing with the big guys. So it's even a bigger hurdle when we do it for that. But if they're having a conversation and they're saying, and these rooms are out there, the therapies out there, they're saying, hey, you know, if this happened to one of your friends, it's not about just touch. It's about how you're feeling and what's going on. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about feelings. We don't let the kids know that, you know, these are issues that are happening every day. And they're not just happening to children. There are adults that are living what you live through. So I'm going to close with a good note. It is life-altering, as you spoke so eloquently about. Child sexual abuse is life-altering. But it doesn't have to be life-ending if we get the help that we need. The divorce rate in this country is 53%. When a spouse has been sexually abused, it goes to 88% because the spouse has no help. The person that's going through the recovery has no help. So what do they do? What do we all do? We flee, we go, we run, we marry, you know, we don't get the help that we need. So on a good note, Janie and I went through some tough times, but here we are, remarried. 3 years later. Thank you for your time, and it was a joy to be here, and my thoughts and prayers are the same.